The story I want to tell you today is similar to Genesis of the Bible. It comes from the Nag Hammadi library, a collection of ancient texts found in Egypt in the 40s. This story, or versions of it, appear several times in the collections of writings that have been found, and I find it fascinating because it expands upon the information presented in Genesis, almost as if the version in Genesis is paraphrased from these other texts. Now, we won't know which came first, or which is more complete, because we don't know what texts may have come before these that have been lost to time. I'm going to retell this story in my own words rather than reading verbatim from the translation. If you want to read the original translation, I have a few links in the description, because I'm combining a couple of different documents together. So, on to the story. In the beginning, there was only the infinite. As the infinite, which was all of existence, reflected upon itself, its reflection came into being as pistis Sophia, faith wisdom. She, incorruptible, had a thought. That thought, a shadow, an imperfect being, thought itself alone to be God. Its name was Yaldabaoth, and, finding itself alone, declared, "I am God. There is no other but me." This declaration was a sin against all, against Sophia. And Sophia said to him, "You're wrong, Samael." In this context, Samael means blind god or god of the blind. When he had spoken his sin, he released his power into the abyss, and he pursued it. He created offspring of himself, the rulers or authorities over the heavens of this visible physical world. These lower heavens, one for each of the rulers, are created in the image of the realms above. As Sophia looked down to the waters, the ruler saw her reflection and wanted to possess it, but could not, as she is of the realms above, and they are below. Sophia had looked down to the physical world, wanting to align it to the light above from which it had come. She saw the rulers making plans, making a being of clay to resemble the image of the infinite reflection they had seen. They made the modeled being androgynous after themselves and after the infinite being. They breathed breath into the created man, and he lived but could not stand, only crawl on the earth. Sophia saw the man on the ground, and from the infinite extended light, so he would become a living soul and stand. He was called Adam. The rulers saw that he could stand, and brought him every animal to name. The rulers then placed Adam in a garden, and instructed that he may eat of any plant of the garden except for the tree of knowledge, as he would die. But as he had light in him, the spirit of Sophia, he saw through their false words. They caused Adam to sleep, and opened his side to remove the living female spirit in him from Sophia, and make him ignorant again. They filled his side with flesh, and he had only soul, not spirit. The woman of spirit came to him, and bid him to rise, and when he saw her, he called her Eve, as she had given him life. The rulers saw Adam speaking with the female spirit, and became enamored of her, and wanted to possess her and defile her. They chased her, but she laughed at their foolishness. As they clutched at her, she turned herself into a tree, and left a likeness of herself in her place. They grabbed her likeness and defiled it with their seed. The female spirit, Eve, assumed the form of a serpent, and spoke to Adam, and her likeness of flesh, the second Eve, and asked what the rulers told them of the garden. The woman said, "The rulers told us not to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, not even to touch it, or we would die." The serpent said, "You will not die. Your eyes will be opened as gods." Then the spirit Eve left the body of the serpent. The woman ate the fruit, and her eyes were opened, and she gave the fruit to Adam as well. They realized their ignorance and lack of knowledge, and clothed themselves. The chief ruler came. He couldn't find Adam, and called out to him. Adam said he heard the ruler and was afraid, so he hid. The ruler realized they had eaten the fruit, and asked why. The woman pointed to the serpent. The ruler, not realizing the spirit had already left the serpent, cursed it. Then the rulers kicked Adam and Eve from the garden, and cursed them as well. They gave them lives of difficulty, so that they might be distracted from further seeking the spirit. The flesh Eve, the second Eve, bore Cain, who farmed, and Abel, who raised sheep. To Yaldabaoth, the creator of the rulers and the physical realm, they offered their gifts. The Creator refused the offerings of Cain, but praised the offerings of Abel. So Cain killed Abel in jealousy. Then the Creator cursed Cain for having killed his brother. The second Eve bore Seth with Adam, but she then bore Norea, a female, not having Adam's male chromosome. which is implied as the seed of the rulers. And mankind began to multiply. The rulers counseled with each other to flood the earth and eradicate all things. But when the leader heard their plan, he set Noah to build an ark. Nerea went to Noah, wanting to board the ark, but when he refused, she burned it, and he had to build it a second time. The rulers went to Nerea to lead her astray, and claimed her mother Eve went to them, implying that their defilement of Eve was her own doing. She told them that her mother is the spirit Eve, not the flesh Eve, who they did not defile, and she is not their descendant. An arrogant ruler drew forth all his might, and demanded she service him as Eve had. So Nerea called to the higher spirit, Sophia, for rescue from their clutches. An angel descended and asked why she had called. The rulers retreated. She asked the angel his name, which was Eliath. He said he was one of 4 luminaries of the Great Spirit. He told her those rulers have no power over her, as within her is the spirit which they cannot defile. She asked how those rulers came into being, and the angel told her of Pistis Sophia, the birth of shadow and matter, and all that came after. He told her the body is created by Yaldabaoth and his offspring, the rulers, but the soul comes from the spirit of truth above, and one day truth will be known, and the rulers will release their authority. So this story has some interesting parallels to the biblical version, and perhaps makes sense of some gaps and duplications in the Genesis story from the Bible. This painting is meant to represent Sophia as the spirit Eve, giving the fruit of knowledge to the second flesh Eve. I painted the spirit as a luminous being, reaching down from above with her gift, and the earthly flesh being standing below and reaching up. I wanted to create an ethereal scene, so I painted the background to look somewhat like space or an abyss. I also created Spirit Eve as clothed to symbolize her already having knowledge, and Flesh Eve as naked to symbolize her not yet knowing. This is painted on Arches watercolor paper, cold press, with core watercolors. I did the initial sketch in pencil, scanned it into my computer, and refined it digitally. Then I printed the outlines on regular printer paper, and I used my lightbox to trace them onto the watercolor paper. And I just directly do the lines with a glass dip pen and P.H. Martin's ink, rather than tracing it again in pencil and going over it. It makes it a lot quicker and less of a tedious process. I then use a pointed silicone nail art tool to apply the masking fluid, which is also a core masking fluid. And I apply that pretty much everywhere that I don't want the background colors to overlap at all. So that way I can be a little crazy with applying my background colors and I don't have to worry too much about the edges while I'm going at it. So I put down the background and refine that and work on that for a while. In between layers, I use my hairdryer just to dry it a little faster so I don't have to wait as long. Then once I'm happy with my background color layer, I go in and peel off all the masking fluid. And I've learned to be pretty careful about this, and even so I still miss spots, because there are occasionally edges where the masking fluid is thin enough that it'll leave a little bit behind, and I don't usually see it until I'm putting watercolor over it, and then I can tell that the spot is lighter than it should be, and that there's just a thin, tiny bit of masking fluid there that I need to get off. So I wait till the watercolor in that area is dry, and I use my eraser to get that up. And I try to touch it up as best I can. Up close you can kind of tell where it was, but from afar it's not visible, and I don't think you can really see it on camera at all either. So I get up all my masking fluid, and then I start working on the 2 figures. The one at the top is the Spirit Eve, the direct bit of light that came from Sophia. The one at the bottom is the likeness that the Spirit Eve left behind for the rulers to grab a hold of. This scene, as I said, is the Spirit Eve above giving the fruit of knowledge to the Flesh Eve below. I know in a biblical sense people often refer to it as an apple, and it probably was actually meant to be a fig, but since the story is pretty metaphorical in most cases, it's probably more a story of enlightenment rather than an actual physical fruit that you can eat. So I painted it to look kind of like an atom that's kind of glowing from within and looks like it's made up of a lot of tiny particles, which is probably hard to see on camera. I try to put higher resolution images over on my Instagram, which is also same username, the Mad Paintress, so you can check that out there. But I tried, like I said, I tried to paint it kind of like an atom. I have the rings very faintly around it, and I tried to make that whole area just kind of glow outwards. And when I painted the figure above, the Spirit Eve, I tried to light it as if all the light was coming from that fruit of knowledge. And I don't know how successful I was there. I'm still kind of experimenting with lighting like that comes from a small but very strong source rather than the way I usually light my artwork, which is more ambient light coming from a much bigger light source like the sun or many lights in a room, you know, kind of how we normally experience life. And I do like normally to do very soft light. I don't like strong shadows just because I guess even in reality I kind of feel the same way. I like very soft, not harsh light in photography and everything, so same with my artwork. I like the softer kind of lighting. Plus, honestly, when I paint that kind of lighting, it's not as intimidating. So, this piece obviously has much stronger light, and I think it was fairly successful. I'm not 100% happy with the face either, just because the angle is a weird angle, for one, to find reference for, and also just to draw in general. But I think it came out pretty good. I think it generally gets my point across with there being a gifting of something not physical, something kind of luminous or ethereal from one being to another. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the painting and the story. I will see you all next week when I will be talking about artists and the idea of finding your style, and thanks for watching.